What's up, guys? Welcome back to the WRPF Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uslar. Episode 52, third episode in our Meet Director series. We've already had some awesome guests, and I'm super excited to welcome Heidi Dehnel. You guys might know her on Instagram by Future is Female Powerlifting. She has a large page. And then she has her personal page, of course, as well. But you guys may have seen her page before. She is also the Alabama state chair for the WRPF. She is the co-meet director for the upcoming Southeast Regional Championships. That's going to be held in Alabama on May 24th, 25th, and 26th.
Yep.
So welcome, Heidi. I'm super happy to
Welcome.
have
Thank
you
you.
on here. We got tons of different things to talk about. Obviously, we want to talk about regionals. We want to highlight regionals, what you guys have planned for that. We'll do that towards the later end of the episode. But I just want kind of people to get to know you, your early
Yeah.
history, exposure to powerlifting, starting your brand, becoming a meet director, all that jazz. So take us way far back. Tell me what you were doing before powerlifting and how the heck you heard the word powerlifting for the first time.
Uh, that's very interesting. I think one of the things that maybe a lot of women have, I think a lot of people, right? We come into powerlifting because we kind of need it in our life. And I was going through a really rough time prior to powerlifting. So I was pregnant with my first child. I was also going through a divorce. My father was diagnosed with cancer. There was a lot of very mental difficulties I was having, like all kind of shit happening. And I think after I gave birth, after kind of the dust settled with my personal life, I wanted to get back in shape. So my degree is in kinesiology. So I lifted a long time, and then I took a big long break for a while. And then I got back into sort of just getting in shape, right? I wanted to look better. I wanted to feel better about myself. And then I realized that I like the performance side of things. I like lifting heavy. I didn't really know too much, contrary to like having a degree in it. Doesn't mean we all know you can have a degree. Doesn't mean you know shit about training, right? And that was sort of where I was. And it wasn't until I met my husband now and his buddy, Ronnie, who knows if he'll be listening to this, but Ronnie and my husband were deployed. So they were in Iraq. And Ronnie used to powerlift. And this was like 2010. And my husband started powerlifting with him. He didn't really know. It was really shitty spots. We have videos and pictures to prove it. So then I started getting involved. And it was just on my own. Like I was training myself. I didn't know really anything. And then I started taking programs from online. I started getting into bodybuilding at the same time. So I did my first non-sanctioned, totally like now looking at it as a meet director, like what the fuck was this guy thinking? He was just some dude that showed up to Anytime Fitness and was like, I'm going to put on a powerlifting meet. And all of us were like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's join it. And it was a push-pull. He had these I still keep the medals. They're little trophies. It was great. And that was my first time ever having like a competition on lifting. And I remember just like loving it. I was like, this is great. So after that,
this is pretty old school in the grand scheme of things, right? So when was
yeah,
your first daughter born?
they were born, let's see, '09.
Oh,
So
nine. So
born in
before
'09.
that, you were a gym goer. It was
Yeah,
your background, just kind of recreationally going, lifting. And I mean, at
but
the end
not
of the
very much.
day, not
It was
much.
it
But
was
when you
really
went to
like
a
right
regular
after that.
gym, you don't see like back then, 15 years ago, you walk into any regular gym now, the chances are you might see someone who's kind of powerlifting. Back then,
Right.
no, not at all, right?
No, I was
So
deadlifting on an easy bar. I didn't even know what it was. Like I had no concept. I was doing an easy bar from the gym at my complex. No idea really if I was doing this right. Nobody would give me feedback. I was still reading all the power magazines back then, and all the like we didn't have really powerlifting wasn't really that popular. I remember seeing some of the people who I admire now. Like I really Susan Salazar was my first powerlifting coach, but she was like my first inspiration. And I remember seeing her, and she'll always laugh because I tell this story, but it was in 2010. Ronnie was competing, and it was USPA Hawaii. And now my friend Darren was, the host out there. But I remember seeing Susan thinking, oh my gosh, she's doing bodybuilding and powerlifting. I could totally do that. And I just remember thinking like, that's super cool. And this is so long ago. And then fast forward to 2016, she becomes my coach when I moved to Texas. And it was just, you know, like it was a really cool moment for me. But
Well,
that was kind of like my introduction.
That's really cool because we'll give you guys. I'll give you a quick spoiler alert. Next week, our next week's guest is going to be Leonetta Richardson, who is Susan Salazar's partner, and it helped build USPA in Hawaii for many, many years. So you were talking about that. So were you living in Hawaii with your now husband at that time?
Yep. And she was living there, so she was stationed there. And I don't even know how I saw her. I think she was on like somebody had said something, and I saw her name, and I was like, who is this person? And she was like my height, my weight, she's Latina, you know, so I felt like very close to her in that sense. I'm like, well, she could do it, I could do it. And then years passed. I moved to Fort Leonard Wood, where that was like the first station I moved to with my husband. And I continued to powerlift there, totally on my own. I went into bodybuilding for many years. I competed in bikini and then figure. And I was trained with actually Dexter Jackson's team back then was smaller, it was a bunch of girls, but I used to train with Dexter Jackson, and then I just got tired of bodybuilding. I just wanted to, like, I always ended up deadlifting and benching, doing all the things that really wasn't on my program, but I really enjoyed it. So after my last show in New York, I was done. I was like, I dieted too much. I was tired. I didn't want to do it anymore. And I just wanted to get back into something that was based on lifting. Not aesthetics, you know. And then I got back into powerlifting, and then I got pregnant with my last child. And so this is like 2014. Give birth, go, and I moved to Texas, and that's where I meet Susan. And that's kind of like where I really started powerlifting much more full time. Like predominantly, that's all I did. You know, of course, with her, she is a combination of bodybuilding and powerlifting, so you're always going to have kind of that mix. But we had such a really cool crew in El Paso, and the vibes are always cool out there. And then I moved out here because we decided we wanted to open a gym. So my husband got out of the Army. My in-laws live here in Huntsville, which is North Alabama. We're really close to Nashville. And we knew we needed some support. I'm from Hawaii originally, so moving back to Hawaii was just not possible. Not now. So we started our gym in 2017 here. So we've been open since. We do small group training. We focus mostly on Gen Pop, but we do some powerlifting too. So it's kind of like that small subset of people who I never thought would dig powerlifting. Because, you know, it's a niche. I never thought people would dig it. And then because I always powerlifted. And then people started coming. They were like, oh, yeah, powerlifting. I was like, yeah, do you want to do that? Like, it was like weird to me. Like, oh, all right. And then slowly it started accumulating. And I would say like 20% of our clientele are powerlifting. And they're average people. I mean, we live in an area that's like engineers. We have NASA. We have a bunch of FBI. So there's a ton of engineers and cerebral people here. But they got regular jobs, you know, they're not doing this full time. They're doing it for hobby. And that's what kind of like got me into giving back. I've always liked to give back in whatever I did. So I started with USPA in 2015 or 2016 when I was in Texas. Susan actually kind of got me into that. And I've been a judge. I was a judge with them up until, you know, last year. And then now I've been with WRPF since. So I've been judging a long time. I've been meet directing for about 4 years now. And that's a big shoe to fill. I think I like events. I do events that are Polynesian events. They're a little different. They're Polynesian competitions, but I felt like these two things married the things I like. I like events and I like powerlifting. So these two come together really nicely. Yes, I've been a meet director for a few years now, and I only did like 1 or 2 a year, like not big at all. Charlie really is our big person on the in the state who was doing all of our meets. So to have him help me kind of transition was important because everybody knew him. He had good meets. Everybody likes being, you know, we have a good feel and a good vibe in the state. So yeah, now I feel more comfortable, obviously, because now we're hosting Southeast Regionals, which is going to be a huge deal here in the next 2 weeks.
All right, pause. I want to take it back. Tons of things to cover before we get into present day. So first, I want to kind of hear a little bit more about 2010, right? Because there's not a lot of people. There's out of 52 episodes, there have been a handful and a few people that I've been able to interview who had such early exposure to powerlifting, pre-social media, Instagram, so to speak, if you will. And you were someone who's insanely fortunate that somewhere small, such as Hawaii, happened to already have a thriving powerlifting scene thanks to people like Susan, Leonetta, etc. So what was that like? Your now husband was the first one to get exposed to it. You guys meet. What kind of gym were you training at? What was it like going to that first competition? What was the state of powerlifting versus then we'll kind of transition into 2014 when you started taking it serious again, and there's obviously a lot of growth. That's where, in my opinion, was kind of the rise of modern day powerlifting, right?
Yeah, I agree. I would say that in Hawaii, they've always had a strong presence. So Darren, who is the USPA chairman there for years, ironically, Darren lived in the same building as I did. I used to ride in the elevator with him, had no idea what powerlifting was. He used to have his huge truck in the front of the building, the Mana barbell, no clue. But he had been doing meets a long time. They're much smaller. I mean, not that much smaller. The first time I saw that meet, it was in a gym cafeteria, and they had like an area where it was elevated where people could perform. So they were lifting up there, and there was, people just sitting down. It's not very different, I would say, than what it is now. But I never got to compete in Hawaii because I moved shortly after that. So I moved, and my first competition was actually in Missouri. So it was definitely still small. As it grew, I would say some of the biggest difference, of course, is like nobody is filming anything. Like there's
right. In 2010, our phones weren't good enough to freaking pop them out and film a video. Come on now.
No. You had a lot more raps. I saw way more geared people, which is not to say it was a ton, but way more than we have now. But I think one thing that has always remained the same is the community feel. Nothing has changed in that way. I feel like now, of course, we have a lot more women. I was always one of the few, if not the only one in the beginning. Just even in the gym training, like it was me and then there was 4 guys, and that was it. But yeah, I would say that some of the biggest differences is that it didn't seem that much different, to be honest. Like as time progressed, it didn't seem to change that much more, other than the look of things, the popularity of it. That's probably the only thing that now visually looks a little different.
Yeah, definitely. I got into powerlifting personally like 2013, 2014, and it was, like you said, extremely male dominant, right?
Yeah.
All
Totally.
freakish, huge, big dudes. Rise of social media obviously is making it more accessible that you can watch and you can see, but it was still so niche, right?
Yeah.
It really wasn't until that 2016, and I remember Susan Salazar was one of the first females. I remember watching her compete because in like 2015, 2016, I was traveling to Vegas for USPA Nationals and IPL Worlds. And I remember that was one of the first times I saw her. It was either in 2015 or 2016. I was like, holy shit, wow,
Yeah.
The female powerlifting still really wasn't on the radar then, right?
No, not
so
at all.
give me kind of through your lens, social media. Now you have, a social media page highlighting females powerlifting, but while you're watching it, while you're training, while you're competing through that period, you move to Alabama, you open your gym. Where did you start kind of seeing that rise? And besides the figures like Susan Salazar, who were you looking at? Because it's obvious to say everyone that we talk to right now, it's so huge, right? Everyone, it's almost becoming a household name. People understanding and knowing what powerlifting is, right?
Yeah.
So kind of take me through that shift through your lens, being able to experience it through all of that.
Yeah, I think initially I had no plans of taking this as a business or any kind of opportunity in this way. Like I was a personal trainer at the time, but for me, it was my hobby. It wasn't I wasn't going to train anybody in that. I'm training Gen Pop people, lose weight, all that kind of stuff. But I was like, nah, that's like my thing. Cause I didn't think anybody liked it. Like there was a handful of us and that was it, especially the women. So there's definitely a smaller involvement of women, but it was the women who love things like CrossFit or were really into performance based. Those are the women that sort of gravitated towards powerlifting. And I think as the rise of CrossFit, as the rise of all these women in lifting in general, I saw that increase. And it definitely was eye-opening to be at a meet and then you see women. Whereas now you could watch something and there's a ton of women there. You can see them, but before it was like no clue. You had no clue who was going to even be there. You don't see the roster before. It wasn't on lifting cast. You had no clue. I remember my meet after I gave birth to my last daughter. JP was there because JP's out in Kansas City, and he was squatting. Like we're all like, "What? This dude's squatting 1,000 pounds? What is?" And it's just like a state meet, you know what I mean? So we were all like, "What is going on?" But that was the level of like, nobody knew anything. It really is just all word of mouth and community. When I think it changed for me is when I started training in with Susan. There was a lot more women who started coming into powerlifting that I saw, at least in Texas and El Paso. And these women were freakish. I mean, to me, they're very fucking strong. And as time went on, I was like, man, these women are very competitive. And it just was a slow rise. And I think for me, I started the page really as a podcast first. I started wanting to listen for women who were being interviewed, who were, like dominant women in the sport, but I couldn't find any. So I'd like Google names on Apple, I couldn't find any. And then I find one, I'm like, that was a whack podcast. Like, well, for me at least, and the perspective I think is a little different, but I wanted to know, like, how was it, training through your divorce? How was it when you had your first child? Did you, struggle with, all these things that I thought were questions pertaining more towards women, but like maybe a woman would only ask. And that's what made me start the podcast. And I wanted to hear those things. So I wanted to interview the women that were being asked these questions. And Susan was actually, I think, my fifth interview. And Leo was like, I don't know, the one right after that. But that's when I realized, damn, there's a lot of women that are powerlifting. There's a ton. And then it just skyrocketed. And then after that, I realized that, there is a area of opportunity for women too in powerlifting, like just recognition wise, like not a lot of women being recognized, in my opinion. And I could see why it was happening. Women just weren't really as dominant in the sport as before. I mean, of course, you're going to have people like Becca Swanson and all the huge names from before, but you didn't see the Joe Schmo at the gym down the street or whatever. But I don't know. I just felt like it slowly made a turn, probably around then, right when I started my podcast around 2018. And I feel like that's when I just started seeing more coverage of women in sports. And the narrative changed too. Like socially, I think we see a lot more of like strong is the new skinny. That was those kind of stupid catchphrases in the beginning, but I mean, those sort of led the way to kind of what we're at now. But yeah, now it's like, I think I have 2 meets coming up. So we have regionals, and one of them, I think, is 50% women, which is crazy to me. And then the other one is like a 60-40, which is amazing. So there's definitely been an improvement in involvement, and I hope it continues that way for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. It took a long time, even through that rise of popularity from 2014, 2015, 2016. When I was doing powerlifting, I started my club out of the corner of a CrossFit gym because I personally didn't like CrossFit. I didn't like doing it myself. I started doing like Wendler 531, Brandon Lilly's Cube Method, all these different programs. And I'm like, man, this is really fucking cool. Yeah, I'm teaching CrossFit classes. I'm teaching weightlifting. Like, what if I teach people how to do this stuff? And it was same with the other people there. They're like, oh, because in most things, general population people are going to get bored, right? Like they might already be getting bored of the CrossFit. They might be getting bored of this. The CrossFit might be hurting them. So I started this club, and it was insane what a success it was. And I was really young at the time. I was like 21, 22, something like that.
Crazy.
And I was going to these USPA Florida meets in 2015 and taking like 20, 25 people.
Wow.
And like 10 of those people were females. These were all people who were CrossFitters who then see I have my club from 6 to 8 p.m. and like, I want to go try that instead, and on the whiteboard, we had a program written up. And I remember all the older, coaches and older people like looking at me, sizing me up. They're like, who the hell is this kid? And these people coming from CrossFit, with the wrong equipment or whatever it was. But it kept growing from there. But even through that, when I left that gym in 2017 to start working for Hybrid, when Hybrid opened their gym, and Steffi she used to work out at the gym that I worked at before she was Steffi Cohen, and
Mm-hmm.
started powerlifting, and she's getting famous. But even through all that, when I start managing the gym and they open an actual powerlifting gym as opposed to a club that I had in the corner, females weren't coming around, like
Yeah.
Steffi was catching some females' eyes, but at the end of the day, her audience still was predominantly male. When you
Yeah.
looked at the analytics on Instagram at that time, 2017, 2018, it starts rising and getting a bit more popular. But I really feel like it wasn't until the last few years, call it the last like 4 or 5 years, that powerlifting has become such a household name and easily accessible, readily available. The young generation of people, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, because you weren't seeing that, 7, 8 years ago. The age demographic of people getting into it weren't these extremely young kids. Now it's these extremely
Yeah.
young kids, and they're talking to their friends about it. They're talking to their little girlfriends about it. They're bringing
Yeah.
them over, and everyone's doing it, and it's cool, and it's easier, and it's crazy to see, because I never really compared that lens, and I've talked a lot about where with the gym that I started at and the club that I started, but I never really looked at the analytical term of, or the aspect of it, that it was really just normal people who kind of wanted to do something different, and it's
Yeah.
same like at your gym, like what you were saying,
Yeah.
you're just catering to people getting healthy, but then they see
Yep.
that, they're like, whoa, I want to try that. And at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's going to get you healthy. It's working out at the end of the day,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether you call it powerlifting or not, you're lifting weights, you're lifting them fast, you're doing high reps, you're getting your heart rate up, whatever,
Yeah. And I think as adults, we don't have anything that puts us in a competition anymore. So like as kids, we can play sports and compete. But as adults and as we get older, we realize that we don't have anything that's actually we can compete in. And I feel like powerlifting is one of the ways where, of course, you're gonna have people who are gonna sacrifice a lot and sacrifice a lot of their own personal life to be the best of the best. And then you're going to have people who just don't give a shit at all, right? We're going to have these extremes. And I think there's a lot of people in this gray, like myself, who wanted to challenge themselves somehow in a way that wasn't terribly painful. That you could make it terribly painful, but I find that most people want to compete, and a lot of women don't do that. Like a lot of women don't do something that's competitive, and this is a way for them to not necessarily have to be super athletic. They don't have to worry too much about their how they look outside of a singlet, where they're worried about that, of course. But there was all these things that lowers the barrier of entry for them, so that they could come in and be like, yeah, I think I could do this. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Like I could compete and maybe look stupid or something. Like that's what they think. But really, there's no problem with it. The barrier of entry is so low for a lot of people that they can include it. And I think now people are realizing that, and that's what's helping people get on board. And lifting has always been something that, at least for women, is not necessarily something that was, nurtured as boys. Like my mother was like that generation, the boomer generation, never did that shit. Her mom was like, you ain't doing none of that. But my mom was always, my father too, was always trying to nurture that in me. Like, you do what you need, sports, whatever you want to do. But they never did any of that. So it's like funny to have a lot of like the Gen X people now who may have not done any of that. Now they're starting to compete. Now they're like, wow, this is great. This is awesome. And those are the kind of people that I love to see on the platform. When I see stories of people who have struggled a lot personally, disease, lifestyle, bankruptcy, who knows? And I get these stories of people, and I know them personally from our state, and I see them up there, and I'm a hot mess. I'm just like freaking bawling, and I get all emotional when it comes to that, because I think, like, for me, powerlifting is more than just competition. It changes a lot of people's lives, and I think that's where we're kind of like at this, where, wow, people know it is accessible. We can find it everywhere, and people are joining in and sort of having fun with it.
100%. Like you said, the barrier to entry, and like, again, reflecting back on those CrossFit days, it's like people want something to keep them accountable, right? Want something to kind of work towards. You sign up at a regular Globo gym, you walk in, there's a billion people, there's no structure. You have to figure out in your head what you want, what you have to do, how you're supposed to work out, what's the right thing to do. There's so many different things you can do. Same thing at CrossFit, right? You sign up at a CrossFit gym, And it's frustrating. You see everyone doing all these cool skills and these muscle ups and the clean and jerks, and you just look like complete crap, and it's kind of defeating. And I think that was so much of the allure of like my people seeing my club, like, oh, I learned that on day one. I can do a squat.
I
Like,
could, yeah,
that's
exactly.
fine. I can lay
Yeah,
down and I can bench. If someone wants to try to put a goal of, I want to compete in CrossFit. Oh,
yeah,
fuck. Look at all these events that I have to be able to do. I have to do all these things. I'm going to look stupid. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to not
yeah,
finish, as opposed to, oh, all I got to go do is lift as much weight as I can. It's
yeah,
such an easy barrier to entry. And like you said, as you're out of high school, you're out of college, in what aspect are you going to still compete? You really
yeah,
can't. And powerlifting is one of those few things that it gives people, whether they had competitive nature before or whether
yeah,
it was never there, and now it's something that just interests them to keep accountability. It's
yep,
the perfect thing for that. Yeah, I think
yeah.
that was
It's
just the
really
the
interesting.
perfect rise and the perfect culmination to grow it to what it is now.
Yeah, I love it. And it's funny because like I competed in my first jujitsu competition a few months ago, and I jokingly said, almost 2 years of jujitsu, I broke my arm and tore my ACL and my knee. Like, but 12 years of powerlifting, very minimal injuries. I'm pretty lucky to say I've never really torn anything. All the normal, I think, aches and pains that come with it. But again, anybody can kind of hop in for the most part and get to competing with powerlifting. And I think there'll be arguments, especially from some OGs, like if you feel good all the time, it's bullshit and you're not progressing, or and I can value some of that. Like people got to work hard. That's no matter what. But it's definitely an easier sport on the body than CrossFit would be, or jiu-jitsu, or any other sport you might enter as an adult.
Yep. So let's take it through. You said around 2018 is when you opened your gym.
Yeah, I opened in 2017, and then I started the podcast a year later, so 2018.
Okay, so you have your gym. Again, you're kind of catering mainly to Gen Pop people. You
Mm-hmm.
had already been involved before that as a judge or involved in USPA in Texas. Now you're in Alabama. So where does it come into play, you getting involved in events in Alabama and
Yeah.
doing any yourself?
Wow. Let's see. I think Charlie had approached me about being, at the time, he was the only meet director. He was state chair and the only meet director. He was hosting everything. And he approached me a few years later asking me if I wanted to, because I had told him before, it might be something I wanted to do. It felt like a big undertaking, to be honest. And the events that I did are similar in the sense that they're competitions, but totally different kind of like environment. So I think my first meet might have been 2019. And I held one meet. It was at my gym. Well, not my gym because I have a studio, but we held it at my friend's gym. And it's called Core Wars, based off of Star Wars. My gym's name is Core. And it was Star Wars themed. I give away lightsabers. I've given away helmets. Like the last one was really great. I got a couple of stormtrooper helmets, everything. It's so much fun, like when you theme it like that, it becomes so much fun. But yeah, transitioning to that was scary as hell because all I could think is like, man, if I fuck this up, I'm fucking up somebody like they've been training for 6 months. And if I mess up something on this or don't plan this right, or what if this takes too long, or, there's a lot of like uncertainty. And it came out great. Like I didn't have no problems, everything worked out fine. So from then I just kept doing one or two meets. So I can't even remember how many I've done now. Not as many as Charlie. Charlie's been doing them for 13 years now. It's kind of a seriously long time. But now I'm going to be probably taking over all the meets in Alabama. It's Charlie's last year. So I'll be taking over the rest of the meets with one of our other meet directors, Derek. So it's some big shoes to fill because it's definitely like it's the whole state. It ain't like I'm just taking care of my area anymore. But I feel like for me, it's important I do it for the lifters because if I don't do it, I don't know who else would do it. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to hold these meets for them. And I love it. I enjoy being a meet director. I love seeing people for the first time come out I love seeing kids. I love seeing families. I love all of that. So it's worth all the headaches and the stress and the anxiety that comes into it. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at now. Still got my gym, still got the podcast. I don't do as much episodes now, but still doing at least knowledge-based stuff on the podcast.
I love it. It's funny because I haven't told this story on the podcast yet, but I'll tell you.
Okay.
So me getting personally into meet directing and for powerlifting, the gym that I worked at, the CrossFit gym, we had a huge Olympic weightlifting club, huge Olympic weightlifting community, like dominated the state of Florida for Olympic weightlifting. They ran
Wow.
2 huge meets a year that like big time like national team people would come and compete at. I remember seeing this guy Leo who came from Cuba, clean and jerk like 190 kilos, like the first year that I started that gym in 2012, right? So they had 2 a year, 2012 or 2013 when I started. There's one in the summer, one in the winter. 2014, one in the summer, one in the winter. So I'm exposed to competitions and I'm learning like all these ins and outs and logistics by helping, my old boss with all that stuff. And I started powerlifting myself. And I'm like, man, I want to do something powerlifting related.
Right.
So, and at that time, I'm going to USPA Florida meets. I'm like becoming doing the process to become a judge in 2015. And I'm like, man, what if I do a super total meet? And the reason why I remember this, I hardly even think about it. It was almost 10 years ago now. It's because I saw like a Facebook picture reminder that, it was 9 years ago. It just passed. And oh man, you want to talk about shit show? That was the biggest, obviously unsanctioned,
Right.
no powerlifting sanction. We didn't pull a weightlifting sanction on it either. So it's kind of a free for all. And I just kind of had like this preliminary schedule. I set up 3 squat racks. I had three, so we had no combo racks. Get the hell out of here. We had no kilo plates. We had no actual power, not even a power bar. We had crappy old CrossFit bars. And I had 3 platforms, all running simultaneously at the same time, just calling people out to come do their squat attempts, then their bench attempts, and their deadlift attempts, and then people snatched and clean and jerked after. And this was in 2015, and Hayden did it, Steffi Cohen did it, and Trevor Jaffe did it. And Trevor and Hayden were going head to head, and Trevor almost won because Trevor was big into strongman Olympic lifting also at that time.
Yeah.
And then he tore his hamstring on his last deadlift. I think briefly talked about this a long time ago on one of the podcasts because it was in a metal warehouse. This gym was a metal warehouse. Oh, cool. Thumbs up. Metal warehouse, no AC. Literally, it was hotter inside the warehouse than it was outside of the warehouse, this gym that I worked at. And like I said, there was no schedule. There was nothing to follow. It was a complete shit show of a day, but everyone had so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah.
And that also just makes me think about those earlier days where people were way less, hoity-toity about what they need and what they have to work out on. And, that's where I always tell the people at my gym, I'm like, you kids have no idea. What you see around you, you're lucky. You are so lucky.
I mean, your place is the creme de la creme. You know what I mean? They're going to get, not only are they getting kilo plates and all comp stuff, but they're getting them all in all the beautiful plates. You know what I mean? You got all the chromed out, which is amazing. But same thing. My first meet was in Anytime Fitness. Like there was people training on one side of the building, and we were in. It wasn't even. I don't even think it was a regular rack. It was 100% all pound plates and regular bars. We're deadlifting on a regular bar, which wasn't even probably a good bar. Now I think about it. Same kind of idea, but unsanctioned, and we had a good time. It definitely got me hooked, and that's kind of funny that that's your experience. So after that, were you like, this is amazing, I want to continue doing this?
Yes, but I was a USPA judge involved in USPA Florida, and I've talked about this slightly before. The people in USPA Florida had a stranglehold ultimately and like wouldn't allow other meet directors. The first meet that I helped co-direct was a USPA meet, and that was the first hybrid showdown. And that was in 2018. So it wasn't until 3 years later that I was even able to assist. And then after that, I tried becoming a full meet director. And when that wasn't, they wouldn't allow it. It literally like they wouldn't sign off on it territorial wise. That's when I switched to WRPF in 2019. And it's still in 2018 when I switched to WRPF. So I've talked about that where I'm really actually like one of the OGs of
Yeah.
WRPF in the United States. Because at that time, the only other people doing WRPF meets were Dan Green. Dan Green's literally the one I got on a phone call with him because he was the head of WRPF in the United States, and Boss of
Yeah.
Bosses was really the only WRPF meet. And I'm like, hey man, like I got to do something. And he's like, all right, cool. And then like when my judges need to take the test, the test at that time was literally a phone call with Dan Green. To just kind of get your general understanding of the rules. I got all my
Right.
judges, and then my
So
first
different now.
WRPF sanction was 2019, and it was beautiful. It was a blast. It was perfect, and ran
Yeah.
great. And then boom, the rest is history.
That's hilarious. I was actually approached in 2019 to be a meet director for WRPF when I was in California, in San Diego, before they closed the California Training Center. Was it
Right.
called?
That
Yeah,
was the
before they
big
closed it.
shift in 2019 when
Yeah,
Gracie, Russ, all of them kind of took it over when the U.S. Open had to switch to WRPF from USPA. And that was
yeah,
where it kind of took off from there of other people getting involved in the structure all beginning and the
yeah,
organization actually forming to be
totally,
organized.
totally.
And yeah. All right. So present day, right? We got regionals coming up. Take me
Yeah,
through that. You've hosted, like you said, a lot of meets. Luckily, you have
yeah,
someone like Charlie who has a ton of experience
yeah,
running big, large meets. So take me
right.
through for you now getting involved in that, now going forward, knowing that this is going to be on your shoulders. You're going to be the one, in the lead and
Yeah,
the charge for all this.
yeah. So with this one, it was, Charlie has all our equipment. He's got equipment for days, and he's got it all saddled up. But he's been doing it so long that what we have which works out great. I take care of all the management, all the registration, all the money, all that stuff. And he's taking care of all the platforms, everything day of, all that kind of stuff. So it works out really great for us. We've had three other world meets there. So we had IPL World or IPF Worlds. We had North America's there, and then we had two other state level meets at this place. But it's Orange Beach Event Center, which you can imagine an event center is going to be a large scale, venue already. The 18,000 square foot venue. We use part of it for weigh-ins. Everything is going to be in there, and it's amazing. As far as like the planning, for me, like it was kind of seamless to kind of go into that. Luckily, we've had it at that place before. So the biggest, like, how it works is they have our thing on file. So they have a layout, and they're like, okay, do you want this same layout? And we're like, yep. And so, like as far as that goes, they know exactly what we're getting into. They know what we need. They provide everything, which I think a lot of people don't realize in meet directing. Like there's so much to planning and organizing that people don't understand. Like visually, what you're going to have to pay for so many things that maybe that place doesn't provide, but luckily they provide almost everything: chairs, you name it, background, lights, whatever. So for us, I think it was easier to kind of move into this. I think the hardest part for me was I've never ran a 2-session meet. So having a 2-session while also having another weigh-in happening at the same time, you know what I mean? So you're going to have a lot of like logistics of okay, we need people there doing weigh-ins. We also need people there. We need people at the front door. We need people in the back. We need people helping spotting and loading. There's a whole well-rounded look that needs to be done when it's at an event this big, because so many things can fall between the cracks. But for me and Charlie were talking about, I was like, I want this to be like amazing. I want to be able to give them everything we possibly can. So we have Pioneer, Rain. We have a bunch of local sponsors as well as bigger ones. So we have Sour Strips. They're going to be giving candy to everybody. Of course, Rain's on board with all the drinks that they're going to give. We have Element that's going to be providing everybody with a bunch of samples of their new stuff. And like for me, I wanted it to be like, you're coming to Southeast Regionals, WRPF Southeast Regionals is going to be awesome for you. You're going to have a great experience. It's going to be run well. It's going to be started on time. You're going to have everything you need. Shit ain't going to fall through the cracks. Like for me, that's the most important thing is logistically, can they have a well-run meet that is organized and on time? Because nobody likes when shit's off. Like nobody wants to be lifted till 9 o'clock at night or something crazy. But yeah, regionals is our next one. We have another one in 2 weeks from now. So it's regionals on the 25th, and then 2 weeks later, we're part of which I'm not even sure I told Anna this, but in the state of Alabama, we have something called the Alabama State Games, and it's a Olympic sanctioned multi-sport event that they've had for 41 years. This year, they're having powerlifting, and I did everything I could, thankfully, to one of my friends, Richard Culver, who owns Mavericks. He dropped my name. I called the guy up. I was like, listen, we need to have us as part of your powerlifting. And he's like, all right. So anyways, it's the first time they're having it, but it's almost like a mini Olympics. So there's Olympics, there's another level, and then there's state games.
We have the Sunshine State Games here. And
oh, you do?
Powerlifting has been a part of it for a long time. I went to one like 7 or 8 years ago, but it's the same thing. All kinds of the first time I went to one, I was like, what the hell is this? Like all these crazy, weird events and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're going to have judo and wrestling at the same building that we're in, which is kind of cool. But they have an opening ceremony. So the day before, they have like a huge party where everybody from powerlifting walks together in like a little parade and you go out there. It's really kind of cool. So those are like the two big things that unfortunately had to be close together. I did not want these two events close together like this, but in order for us to host it at Orange Beach, we had to have this date. But we're filled up. It's filled up. We're going to get day one. We have 2 sessions. I believe we have 120 lifters over the 2 days. Our day 2 is a little smaller, but our day 1 is pretty filled. And I think we've gotten a lot of feedback. I mean, a lot of people come from Florida, right? Because we're really close. We're on the Panhandle, right next to Pensacola, but still considered Alabama, which is crazy to me. So we definitely have a mix of a lot of your state and my state, but it feels like a huge excitement coming for this regional. Like people are really excited in our area to have this happening for us.
Yeah, no, I know I'm personally very excited for it because, like I said, being involved in WRPF now for over 5 years, I was the only presence in the South in general. And I have no desire to travel outside of Miami, capabilities to travel outside of Miami. And people always wanted more. So you guys being, like you said, just outside of the state of Florida, but close enough, it's really cool that it gives people here in the South something more, an opportunity, something to travel to. So I was really excited when I saw you guys took that on because they had a conversation with me about it, and I was like, I'm going to be completely honest. I have too much on my plate,
Oh, I bet.
And because everything that you just touched on is it. Finding a perfect venue is one of the hardest things about running a large scale meet, right?
Yep.
Like for the Ghost Clash, once I finally found the tank, last year, I was like, man, this place is very expensive, but just like everything else in Miami is, this place is perfect. First year, super stressful, figuring out the lay of the land, figuring out a structure, figuring out, all your moving parts. But then once you have it, it's very smooth sailing, in a lot of ways. So it's like, that's my event. That was my venue again this year. That's going to be my venue next year. No need, no reason to move it. Because then again, when you run local level meets, it's completely different. Although there are a ton of logistics, still that go into play, it's nothing like running a large scale meet,
Yeah.
So
I think people visually want that, right? Like when they think of your meet, visually, they're thinking of something that is like, okay, this looks awesome. Same thing with any kind of national or regional event. Like I think people are like, I want something better. I want something bigger. And we're lucky to be able to provide that. Orange Beach, the city of Orange Beach has been very helpful for us. They even awarded Charlie and his wife, because I wasn't involved with it last year, but they got an award for sport and leisure in Orange Beach for bringing in over, it was like $50,000. No, it's more than that. They pretty much, the city counts for how much money they bring in, how many room nights over the course of 4 days and all that kind of stuff. So they said that they brought in the most that year. And so they gave them an award for that, which is really kind of cool that powerlifting was the one that did it. Like out of all the things, and they have cheerleading, they have all these other things, but powerlifting was the one that was the best for the city.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, right. So somewhere like the city of Miami, they're like, oh, you're not bringing to me $500,000. I don't care about you. And that's a tough thing. That's a tough thing about living in a big city versus somewhere like that. And it's the perfect in between because Miami's a difficult place to get to, but somewhere like there on the Panhandle, no matter where
Yeah,
you are, it's easy enough to travel to. It's affordable to travel to.
it's
So
beautiful.
it was perfect. It was beautiful. Yeah, I
Yeah.
grew up in Pensacola. I lived in Pensacola until I was
Oh,
13. Yeah, and then I moved to Miami when I was 13. So I love that area. The Gulf of Mexico, the beach is freaking beautiful.
it
Miss
is.
it. Haven't been back. I go to the west coast of Florida, but the southwest coast, but I can't make it up there this year, but hopefully for next year I'll be able to make it out there.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm excited to see everything. I'm excited to see it all unfold. Um, Sign us out. Let everyone know where they can find you. Will it be a live stream of the meet? Where can they see the roster, etc.?
Yep. Yep. So you can find the roster at liftingcast.com. You can also visit our website, WRPFalabama.com. We have a dedicated page there for it, Southeast Regionals. There will be, of course, live streaming through A1 Digital. If you visit WRPF Americas on YouTube, you'll see the live stream that will be happening. And I will have a lot of updates on the page. So if you guys want to come, if you visit our page, WRPFalabama.com, it's constantly updated what times, food venues. We don't have a hotel, like the hotels are really close, but we have all the information you would need there. And of course, if you have any questions, you can contact us through the website. You can find my podcast, The Future of Female Powerlifting. I'm active on that, even though I don't do as much episodes anymore. That is my contact page, and WRPF Alabama. You can find us over there.
Awesome. Heidi, it was great chatting with you. Great getting to
You too,
know
Alex.
you. Thank you for hopping on, and thank you for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the WRPF podcast.